This is Research Rumble number 5. The topic is domain knowledge essential for effective UX research? Such a great question. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. If you missed any of the first 4 Research Rumbles and you want to see them, they can be found on our YouTube channel. And I'll ask Janine to post some links in the chat right now for the things that I'm discussing. So on our YouTube are recordings of all our past sessions, including these guild groups. We also have a Slack group. We'll paste an invitation. You're welcome to join and continue the discussion there. And of particular importance, vote on potential topics for future Research Rumbles. So we'd love your input. We also have a networking spreadsheet. One of our purposes is to help facilitate connection between and among researchers. So if you'd like to, of course, it's completely optional. You can share your information in that spreadsheet to connect over LinkedIn with others who attend these sessions. Most importantly, we have a survey, and the survey gives us valuable feedback. So please take a minute to maybe open this link and leave it open on your computer, and that'll remind you at the end of the session to complete it. There you can also give input for topics you'd like to see discussed and improvements that you might suggest in these sessions, although it's hard to imagine how, frankly. Okay, I want to announce the next 2 guild groups that we have coming up. For March, it's our first book group, and we'll be discussing the book Accessibility for Everyone. It will be an interview with the author, Laura Kalbag, by our board member, Leah Hogan. So join us if you can for that. It should be a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to it myself. On April 18th, our guest is Roberta Dombrowski. She's a researcher, research leader, career coach, and her session will be consciously crafting your career. Why now is the time to consciously craft your career? So she'll be talking about career planning and strategy for UX researchers. That should be a great session on April 18th. There are actually 2 sessions, one for researchers on the 18th, one for research leaders on the 25th. Okay, we always like to have a giveaway to make these sessions fun. Our giveaway today is a copy of the book, Accessibility for Everyone. So if you stay to the end of the session, you can guess a random number to be the winner of that book. It's restricted to those who live in the US because we've had trouble trying to send things internationally. But for those based in the US, we'd be happy to offer a copy of the book for the upcoming book group. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the 2 incomparable hosts of the Research Rumble. Jess Vice is a researcher and strategist, the former strategy director at Struck Agency. Jess is also an herbalist and grows and mixes herbs to make gourmet teas for health, wellness, and enjoyment. We've given her teas away in past sessions. Anyway, it's a pleasure to have Jess as one of our co-hosts. Our other host is Danielle Green. Danielle is also a researcher, research leader, former research leader. She's co-founder of the Guild and our research director. She's also a professor of applied psychology at the Claremont Graduate University and the director of their UX Master's program. So it's my privilege to turn the time over to Jess and Danielle to start the session.
Thank you so much for that intro, Raymond. That was great. All righty, let's take a look at our agenda today. So this is our typical Rumble format. For those of you who have been here before, for those of you who are joining us, welcome. We will do a little bit of an introduction where Jess and I will present 2 sides of a UX controversy. In this case, our topic today is, do you need domain knowledge to do effective UX research? Something that many people are very polarized on. So we will present the pros and the cons And then we will send you all into small breakout sessions to discuss how has domain knowledge impacted your work as a UX researcher with each other. Once you spend some time together, everybody comes back to the main group and we have a group-wide discussion, sharing what you learned or anything that really stood out to you so that the entire group can benefit. Finally, at the end of the session, we have networking opportunities. So we'll put people into breakout rooms for those of you who want to stick around for the networking. Great way to get to know other UX researchers. Alrighty, so introduction. What is a Rumble? What's the intention of this today? There are a lot of controversies and hot topics in UX research, and we wanted a forum, a safe, happy forum to discuss those things for working professionals without the hype, without the ulterior motives that often come with events like these. So our goal is to facilitate really respectful discourse among you on these topics. We're using Brene Brown's definition of a rumble. So stay curious, show up with an open heart and open mind, and we're here to serve the work and to serve each other with the things that we share. Due to the online format, you're the owner of your own experience here, so feel free to opt in or out of the discussion at any time. You can turn your camera off if you prefer. And if you're here to just listen, maybe make that known in your breakout rooms so that you can participate how you'd like to. Be respectful, stay professional. We've never had a problem with a group of researchers, go figure. And try on other perspectives. There's no follow-up here, so you can try things on, think about them, and leave them at the door as you walk virtually out of here, if you'd like. Okay, so this is our intention for the day. Our topic is domain knowledge, and I'm going to kick us off with the arguments in favor of domain knowledge in UX research. Then Jess will follow up with arguments against. Quick note, as some of you know, we do choose this randomly, so it may or may not reflect our personal views. All right. Domain knowledge in favor. I don't think anyone here today would argue that if you have some incredibly technical or jargon-heavy product, I'm thinking like software for microbiologists or something, I don't think anyone would argue that a researcher who knows the space won't be a little faster than a researcher who doesn't know the space. But I don't think that's what's happening in our industry. Like these aren't the domains that are producing this controversy around domain knowledge in our work. The scope of what is happening is so much larger than that. So we're seeing the top 20 broad domains that employ UX researchers. We're seeing preference for domain knowledge overwhelmingly in these industries. So think hardware experience, software experience, healthcare, e-commerce, finance, these sorts of industries and domains. And even, have you worked on a mobile application before? Have you worked on a desktop application before? So this is where I think the argument happens, is in these spaces of, well, do I really need e-commerce experience to be an effective e-commerce UX researcher? And, you know, let's face it, I think that hiring managers have preference for domain knowledge overwhelmingly. We see this at the Guild a lot. Sometimes for clients, it's one of the most important things they use to decide who to hire. So I'm talking like they're willing to trade years of experience. They're willing to trade expertise in certain methodologies in favor of industry knowledge. So I'm seeing some nods, like this has been your life a little bit. We're seeing these patterns. Okay, So that's the scope of this conversation, is what do hiring managers actually get or don't get from domain knowledge in these types of industries? And here I have summarized what I hear a lot from hiring managers. So what do hiring managers actually get? Number one, top of mind, is just operational efficiency. So a UX researcher who knows internal jargon and even team structure of an industry at a previous company can be quicker to pick up internal operations. And I'll just give an example. Like if you've worked for a health insurance company before, you know that there's probably going to be a different team for the website, the member portal, and the provider portal. You have this mental model of how teams may be structured and the different products that may already be at play for that organization. So I think that this operational efficiency is one of the top arguments that we hear. The next is the validity of the data that you collect, especially qualitative data. So the idea is, if you know some of the jargon that the user base uses, if you understand the user base better, you can create better surveys, you can create better interview experiences, and therefore collect better data. So qualitative interviews are a great example here, I think. If you don't know what feature the user is talking about, it's difficult to ask really good probing follow-up questions to figure out whether that feature is meeting that person's needs. So you can always take the naive approach, right, and ask the user to define things for you. But sometimes, let's be honest, when you take that approach, you can lose depth. You can lose important details that they might give you if they had that rapport and if you had demonstrated that you understand their context. So that's another point. Along those same lines, data collection, maybe a little bit better quality data collection. Qualitative data analysis is another one that comes up a lot. So domain knowledge can produce better outcomes when it comes to analyzing qualitative data. If you don't know two terms are related, you could fail to prioritize a finding or to report on a theme that's actually more prevalent than you would have otherwise thought. This happened to me once when the name of a competitor for a company that I was working for, the name of the competitor was also the name of an app in our suite of products. So it took me longer than I would have hoped to realize that users were talking about turning to the competitor product rather than another application in our suite of products. And it's just because I was unfamiliar with the space. So data analysis, check. Competitive advantage. I was just speaking about competitors a little bit. So if you have extensive experience with a user base or a product space, you're able to detect indirect competitors and other market level things quicker than someone who has to do a bunch of desk research because the space is new to them. So just like a classic example of indirect competitors, mattress companies. Like the biggest competitor for a mattress company is actually melatonin and other supplements for sleep, right? So those stealthier indirect competitors, if you've already worked for a pillow company, then you might already know about some of those types of competitors when you go to work for a mattress company. Maybe a little bit of a silly example, but you get what I'm saying. The next one is just empathy. Empathy for your users. I think it takes time to really build empathy and to be able to get to know someone before you step into their shoes. And if you have spent time with that user base before, you've already begun to cultivate that really deep empathy for them. I worked in telecom years ago, and I did a lot of field research for contact centers. And I swear I'm just a little bit kinder ever after to every customer service rep I ever talked to on the phone, right? So just developing that empathy for a user base will translate to other spaces. And finally, this is something I learned by watching people with more industry experience than me. Sometimes people with a lot of experience in that industry, they've seen many data patterns and they've seen a lot of design best practices. And that can give them a really good intuition for things or a really good first guess at things. An example that comes to mind for me is I once worked at an e-commerce company, and the VP that they hired over product had worked for many online retailers over like more than a decade, well over a decade. And he hadn't worked in anything really in our space, but he'd worked for so many things similar. And he remembered a lot of their experimentation results, so live A/B tests from all of these different companies that he had worked for. And they were just little things like pagination or breadcrumbs or when to pop open another tab when you click on a product, those kinds of tiny things. Not everything translated, not everything that worked for previous companies worked for our company, but some of them totally did. And it was just his knowledge of the space that allowed us to get some growth really quickly on the team by implementing those changes that were not very obvious and that were pretty small. They certainly weren't on our roadmap at the time. So I think this is the summary of what comes to mind for people when they're prioritizing domain knowledge in the hiring process for UX researchers. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jess now to summarize some points against.
Thank you. That was awesome. I found myself nodding along the entire time going, yeah, I agree with you. So leading the cons is tricky. We actually, when we talked about who was going to speak about which part, I chose cons because I do not have domain experience in most of the jobs that I've taken. So a lot of this is from personal experience, going from my very first job where they were really cute. It was a marketing agency. And when I interviewed, the manager said, well, you're a really good writer. I had a degree in English, but you don't know about marketing. But we think we can teach you that. You seem like you can learn. So they took a chance on me. Yeah, so that sort of defined the trajectory for my career. So I think from an against perspective of, especially now for job hunters worrying about, do I need to be an expert in a specific domain and in order to get a job? I think there's some points in your favor. So the first is how do we define an expert, right? When is enough enough? How do we know what expertise means? We have some background information, right? Malcolm Gladwell made famous the 10,000 hours approach, but as you dig into the 10,000 hours approach, he actually didn't reflect the data very clearly. He picked an average of 10,000 hours of practice to reach domain expertise. But the original study found that that was not, that was literally the average. So some folks practiced 25,000 hours and some folks practiced 4,000 hours and reached expertise or mastery in different time periods. So there's not really an agreed upon measure or standard to say this is what expertise is. So expecting someone to be an expert can get a little confusing. I've known folks who walk boldly into a job interview and claim to be an expert, and then you work with them for a couple of weeks and you start to scratch your head and wonder what exactly expert means to them versus what you were expecting or what they sold you, right? They kind of sold you a false bill of goods. I also remember my elementary school PE coach, Coach Cole, who said, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So we're having a mismatch in expertise. Are we talking about quantity or quality? And we can't really gauge that through an interview process necessarily to understand how well has someone learned a domain, or how broadly has someone learned a domain. There's also some research that shows after about 3 years of doing something, we get bored. So it can feel like mastery because our brain says, enough, I've had it, I know everything, I want to move on. So we're even sort of working against ourselves. So my first point is, do we even know what mastery is, or domain expertise is? Is it something defined enough that we can expect it from others? I think it was really interesting, Danielle, that your last point was my second point, that we sort of hold both of the analogous thinking experience in a different field in as a benefit and a con. So in your example, this person had high-level pattern observation across a series of industries that were replicable or applicable to what you were doing. And I've seen that from folks who have high-level experience across different fields. In my personal career, I've been doing this for 15 to 16 years. And by year 12 or 13, I noticed that telecom industry is similar to commercial real estate industry, is similar to tourism and hospitality industry in ways that I could articulate and share that knowledge, even though there was no tie really to the regular onlooker, right? Tourism is so different from telecom, but once you've been inside and seen how the guts work, maybe it's not so different. So I think it's interesting that those could go either way there. I do want to caveat with analogous thinking that I'm not sure fresh eyes or beginner's mindset are beneficial or something to promote, because that does suggest absolutely no experience or an intention to release previous experience, where we are trying to find patterns and threads and be able to make a thoughtful analysis. On that, so my third point is that if we expect everyone who comes in to be a user researcher in our organization to then also be a domain expert, we are putting ourselves at risk of knowledge silos. We're potentially decreasing collaboration. I've interviewed for jobs where they expected the research team or the researcher in particular to know all the ins and outs, to have a complete understanding of how a process worked. And that scared me a little bit. I'm one person. That's an awful lot to hold on my shoulders. And then to ask me to make continuous discoveries on top of that felt like a cognitive load that I wasn't capable of. And I've been on the other side where in the commercial real estate example, when I was working at that company, I didn't know anything about brokerages and how to broker a mortgage on, a 700 apartment building. That was way beyond my domain. However, I had bought a house and I'd been through some of the paperwork for a single homeowner. And so I had a frame of reference. And what I found was, when I went and talked to the brokerage team and was clear that I was new to the domain, but demonstrated that I had analogous experience in something similar, they were actually much more willing to open up to me. We had other researchers approach the brokering team in the history before I got there, and I was warned away from them, actually. They said, oh gosh, don't talk to them, they're mean. They don't want to do anything with research, it's not worth it. But by showing a little bit of ignorance and a little bit of analogous experience, I was able to collaborate with them a little bit better. And we actually ended up building this really beautiful sort of cross-team dependency, where they welcomed me coming to them to give the right answer, rather than me assuming that I knew how the industry worked and making best guesses. So we built this really beautiful collaboration and started to see it extend across other teams as well. I think not having domain expertise encourages an exploration mindset. Recalling that person who bluffed their way really thoroughly through an interview, when you put them in a room with clients, they are less likely to say, I don't know. They are less likely to ask for time to explore and to understand more thoroughly. They're more likely to say, here's the answer and this is what we should do. And that's, you know, that's a coping mechanism. That's also a confidence thing. I think there's a lot of reasons that people do that. I'm not judging any of those. I'm just saying for the project and for the outcomes that we want, do we want someone who comes in with full confidence, or do we want someone who says, I'm not sure I understand how these pieces work together. I'd like a little bit more time, maybe with the team, maybe to do some interviews, maybe to run a survey, so that we get a really complete picture of what we're doing before we make decisions going forward. Yeah, I think one key attribute for everyone that everyone appreciates about a UXR is curiosity. And so when we ask people to be domain experts, are we encouraging them to be curious, or are we asking them to put their foot down and like stand on solid ground and know things? And I wonder that domain expertise maybe pushes us in the direction of too much knowing and not enough curiosity. And I think it's also wonderful that Danielle used empathy and people as a point for, and I'm going to do the same as a point against. I think when we have domain experts who do truly know something inside and out, they've spent 15, 20 years doing the thing, they lose sight of people. And the entire reason that we are in user experience research is to understand people and remember the humans and the environments that are being affected by the work that we're doing. I recently pitched a client on a really big project, and we wanted to start with research, obviously. And they came back and said, well, do we need, you know, six weeks or 8 weeks to do research? That seems like a lot. And I said, well, here's my why. This is why I think we should do it. And this is not the liaison's fault. He came back and said, well, the CEO says he's been doing this for 20 years. You can just interview him. And Danielle's laughing. I can see a couple of faces. Like, you've been there. You've felt that awkwardness, right? Because we know as researchers that, yes, he's been doing this for 20 years, but he is not the repository, the final say, the most nuanced way to understand this domain. He is one person in one industry, in one particular company, who has personal biases and has, you know, limited experience. And if we lean into him as the single domain expert, what box are we putting ourselves into? And who are we harming in the process by trusting one or two domain experts rather than remembering that every field is made up of a giant mix of people? Yeah, so I want to, Danielle, you can go to the next slide. I want to end with our favorite phrase from every researcher ever. It depends. It all depends, right? I think that I completely agree with the pros. I also think that the cons have a lot of strength here, but I think the caveats are whether you need domain expertise depends on the size of your company, the size of your industry, the size of your team. It depends on the position level. Are we talking about juniors? Probably don't need domain expertise, probably won't have it. Are we talking about seniors, directors, people who should lead? Probably should have more. We need to think about the goals of the project. Do we want specificity or speed? There's a lot of sort of compromises that we have to make. And as hiring managers, thinking about the level of expertise we need in a role has a lot of peripheral context that we need to consider. And then also as employees, as we're pitching ourselves into a space or as we're trying to get hired into a job, think about the context that you're pitching yourself into. Do I need to be a domain expert, or can I make a case for bringing in a more analogous approach, a more pattern-based approach, rather than having specific detailed information? Innovation versus maintenance. Do we want to create something brand new, or are we just trying to keep a thing on its wheels and going? I think there's just a lot that depends on the context of domain expertise. So with that, we're going to turn it over to you all, send you out into some breakout groups. Thank you for being here today. This was fun. I hope that your breakout groups were fun too. Okay, so the way we're going to do this, we would love to hear what you talked about. We'd love to hear what came up that wasn't mentioned in the first intro, sort of whetting your appetite for pros and cons of domain expertise. If you would like to contribute, this is an open forum, but we ask that you use the reaction at the bottom, or you can raise your hand. And I say at the bottom, and then I have a hard time finding it myself. Let's see. If I wanted to raise my hand, how might I do that? Just so that
You click reaction, and then there's a button that says raise hand.
raise hand. Great. Okay. So yeah, if you'd like to contribute, go ahead, Janet. We'll start with you.
Firstly, thank you, guys. I mean, I was agreeing with every point both of you made. So your sum up at the end of it depends, sort of like, yes, that really is the case. But we had 4 people who had really very different roles and backgrounds, and that we got into a discussion about what is the domain, because the domain could be a very explicit target audience who is an expert in their field. And that's where your knowledge has to really express itself, like Hannah is working in medical devices, and the type of surgeons and people she's interviewing are very unforgiving if you disclose naivety or don't appear to understand their world. But the actual domain of the devices itself is perhaps easier to grasp of somebody. And we ended up perhaps getting into a discussion about whether it's always best to have 2 people, one who is a domain expert and one who actually brings cross-domain knowledge and more open-mindedness, and avoids those biases. But it was super interesting discussion.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I love the suggestion of diverse teams, right? That we exist in groups and we balance each other, we support each other. That as a hiring manager, that's always something to consider. That what do I have on my team already, and where are the gaps that I can fill? Maybe it's actually someone who thinks in patterns and across industries and is good at this sort of diverse thinking, rather than someone else who knows all the details about this space. I worked in biotech briefly, and when I say that, I mean I built websites for biotech companies. But speaking to the scientists, we always had a conversation up front that I am not a domain expert here. I am a creative. You hired me to be creative, and I'm going to play in that space, and I need you to be the expert and tell me when I get it wrong. But that, please don't expect us to understand how your science works inside and out and be able to give a pitch if we needed to. That's absolutely not our role. So I love the question of what is domain, and then how do we build teams to be really effective? Awesome. Kelly, what would you like to contribute?
Yeah, we had a very similar conversation as Janet and her team had. We talked a lot about, focusing less on like whether one individual should have domain expertise, but thinking about the organization and the UX team as a whole, and like maybe the more senior person should have more domain expertise, but maybe like a junior person having a little bit more breadth of knowledge. We also talked about this kind of concept where if domain expertise is required to be an effective UX researcher, then we're also saying that user research consultants are not effective or not as effective as having an in-house researcher, which makes me uncomfortable. So I feel like that would just start a conversation too of like, is that something we want to say and kind of agree with too?
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing you correctly, I actually think the guild sort of exists to solve that problem. Can we find domain expert UX researchers who are available for hiring in, so that you don't have to have that in-house full-time person? Or can we hire someone who will do, better and different than we would have expected? That's awesome. What else? What surprised you? What actually, here's an interesting thing to think about. What did you have a strong reaction to? That's always a good thing to observe when we sort of negatively respond or sort of feel pushed in our perspectives. Tracy, go ahead.
I cannot speak for my group. I don't think they had as strong of a reaction as I did, but I have a pretty strong reaction around domain expertise as a gatekeeper. Like, I think it's great. And I think there are probably situations where I might use that domain where it would be ideal, but it would kind of be icing, because if I get a domain expert who can't do any of the other really amazing things that great researchers can do, that does not help my team. So I kind of was looking at it as icing. And then one of the best examples we came up with though, where I was like, all right, it might be a signal for something. So like, for example, Min in our team, she would not call herself an expert in her domain. I say she is for the intents of this discussion, but it goes back to what you were saying, Jess, about like how much is enough, right? And like on what aspect of this thing are we talking about? But knowing that she does have that expertise doesn't necessarily mean I need her for that expertise, but it demonstrates to me that she has the ability to take on extremely technical, very complex topics. And that would be a signal that is meaningful to me as a hiring manager. And then the other thing that I was bringing up against domain expertise is just that it's a temporary condition. Not having it is a temporary condition. You're going to join and you're going to learn. And if you are a great researcher and you show me that you can do all these other things, then I know that you're able to do that. So that was kind of some of what I was bringing, maybe a little too enthusiastically to the discussion. And it was interesting though, because I'm a long time, tenured UX person, and my team each had a very specific domain that they were working in, which is different, of course, from my own personal experience. So that was it was a valuable conversation. Thanks.
That's awesome. I think it's interesting that temporary condition can go both directions. With as fast as tech changes, how long are you a domain expert in tech if it's changing every day? Right? Like I think that's an excellent point to bring up. And I also think using domain expertise as you said gatekeeping, but maybe we don't set out to be gatekeepers, but using domain expertise as our primary condition for hiring, what are we losing by focusing in on that one thing that we think that this person needs to have? I think that's a great perspective to share. Thank you. Jan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I found myself like nodding along with everything that you said, Jess. And so it really resonated with me. Like both, I feel like my background is similar. Like I've been as a user research generalist for like about 12, 13 years now. And when you said that like at this point in your career, you were able to bring from one industry to another industry, I was like, yes, that's exactly what's happening with me. And so I felt like you had kind of read my mind, and so I really appreciated that. I feel like the domains are now being required in the job market just because of the embarrassment of riches situation, where like there's just so many people to pick from. But I don't think that that's a good thing. I think that it's good to be a generalist because we can pull in insights from other domains.
Agreed. Yeah, I think I see the same trend that you're seeing, that we have so many applicants to choose from. We can require domain expertise. So I think if nothing else, maybe this session has helped folks who are looking for jobs learn language to advocate for themselves, to get through the filters, right? And get in your cover letter, in your introductory recruiter call or email, being able to say, I know that you require domain expertise. Here are some reasons why you may not want it. And could you talk to me? Could you give me the space? So yeah, I hope that this was empowering, because that can be a really disappointing place to be in.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Oriana, go ahead.
Yeah, I also appreciated your comment, because in our group, we talked a little bit about both the experience of having to learn an extremely technical domain very, very quickly, in David's case, and in my case, going into a technical domain with relevant experience and it being very helpful. So one of the things we talked about is that independently of that, the willingness to continue learning is really critical. And that, in my opinion, at least, that mindset is independent from your level of expertise. And it's very important to also not get complacent, right? So 6 years into working in IT, I still need to continue to be excited about learning about IT, which can also potentially be a very dry topic. So the critical thing there isn't just that I had some knowledge going in, but that I had the passion for that topic that makes me willing to continue learning about it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that takes some self-awareness, right, as a human. And I think asking for domain expertise might limit people's options if passion can't also be part of it. having been in telecom for 5.5 years, I don't have any passion for telecom. I could probably be a domain expertise or domain expert there, but like you would have a real hard time getting me to take another job there unless I was going to learn something, unless I could find a way to grow. And I think those growth roles are something we don't think about from a hiring perspective. What am I offering? Am I offering a growth role, or am I offering, someone who needs to come in up to speed already and get it done? I think sometimes we sacrifice speed for the depth and the interest that we could bring to the team. Great, thank you. Colleen.
Yeah, so to a point you made earlier, Jess, about, the crossing domains, right? Or understanding the domains, especially when tech is involved. So I'm in the insurance automation space, and I think it's important to understand that even though our industry is insurance, that world of insurance changes as tech impacts it. So even though myself, 34 years in the biz, I have insurance domain expertise, but I'm constantly being thrown a monkey wrench because tech is changing it. So I've got to be on my ball, which is why I hire I've hired a non-industry domain person. She's learning it, but she brings a fresh perspective to it because she's got more of the savvy tech side than I do. And it's a really nice balance.
Yeah, I think we're starting to step into how do we convince companies of the value of a diverse research team and the results that they can bring, which is a whole other that's a whole other rumble. We'll have to get to that one. Danielle, let's make a note about that because I'm actually curious about like proving value. We have that conversation a lot. Awesome. Anastasia, go ahead.
Yeah, I was in the same group with Colleen and just wasn't sure if she mentioned the interesting idea that she shared with us. So she mentioned an interesting approach that they use AI to help them to get some knowledge, which is hard to get, both for getting some background before they speak to users and at the same time to analyze the data. So they prepared to be more confidential before they put it in the chat. But I think it's an interesting case how you can solve the problem of knowledge gap.
Yeah.
So if Colleen has any ideas, you can add to it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for how companies document knowledge and share knowledge and make it available, that if they plan to hire junior folks, do they have the resources available so that they can educate themselves? They can get a head start on becoming a domain expert inside the company once they're hired. I've been in companies where, you just are guessing every day what's happening and where to find things. And then other companies hand you a book and you read through it and you're like, wow, I'm caught up enough that I can ask smart questions. Awesome. Hannah, go ahead. And I think, Danielle, check me on time. We've got room for one or two more.
This should probably be the last one, so we can move on to networking.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Hannah, wrap us up.
I was just going to say that, like, for a lot of us who don't have domain knowledge, like I'm actually the person that Kylene hired from being a paramedic with a biology degree, like not exactly like the typical person to hire for UXR, but just from our perspective of like, we need to be, when we're searching for these jobs, like really draw that line so that they don't have to draw it for you about your experience. I really highlighted in my interviews that like my job as a paramedic was often translating what the doctors, what the surgeons, what the nurses were saying to people who didn't have any background knowledge of that, and being able to ask them questions in a way that they could understand what I was asking and get that information. And I think that was really helpful in that interview process. So just like for us who are seeking jobs, like, or for those who are seeking jobs, like making sure that you are your own like advocate and that you can articulate that to people who might not understand your background or where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm coaching, I tell my clients the same thing. Tell people what to hire you for. If you're a learner and you want to be a domain expert, you want to come in and absorb, you're a sponge, you love that kind of environment, make that really clear to me so I can see that you're going to be the one who jumps in and is self-motivated. If you already feel that you've got domain expertise and you want to stay in that space, great. Let me know that. If you have domain, like I have domain expertise in telecom maybe, but I hate that and I don't want to keep going. So I would never put that on my resume unless I really, really wanted a job there. I think telling people exactly what to hire you for is a really, really thoughtful approach, especially right now with so many choices to be made. Awesome. I'm going to give it back to Danielle, who's going to take us into some networking.
Great, thank you. I did just repost the survey. It looks like Raymond reposted all the links that we shared today in the chat. So take a look at those. Give us some feedback on your experience here. It's always helpful if you have ideas for future Rumbles. And we really hope to see you at the next one. So please register for the series if this was a fun format for you. Raymond, when it comes to networking breakouts, did you want to kick us off there?
Yes. Hey, thank you so much, you two, for another great session. These are just wonderful. Great topic, great discussion, great points. So, no, it's time for our book giveaway.
Oh, right.
So, Janine has selected a number from 1 to 100. We can only send the book domestically. We had trouble trying to send one to Brazil last month. So, we're just going to limit it to if you're based in the US. So, if you're based in the US, enter a number in the chat. The closest number to the number Janine has entered, we will send a copy of Accessibility for Everyone. And if you'd like, you can join that session on March 12th, and you'll be all prepped. You'll have read the book already. So we'll just give a minute for everyone to get on record with their number. Ooh, I see one that's very close. 377 is 1 to 100.
Okay.
I used to play these games so strategically with my brothers. If they guessed 5, I was 6. It's like try to wall off as closely as you could your domain. But with this many people, it's hard. Okay, has everyone got their number in? Then, Janine, why don't you announce what the number is you selected?
So, okay, we're all done. Nobody else put a number. The number was 78. Tracy Flores and Mary Carroll, I didn't get your last name, both said 77.
Let's send them each a copy of the book.
There you go.
We have 2 winners today.
Can if you would both, oh, there you are, Carol. If you would both send me just in the chat your email, and we'll make sure we get that out to you.
Okay, that's awesome. For anyone who'd like to, we'll now split into networking, just random breakout rooms if you'd like to take a few minutes to get to know somebody. And of course, it's completely optional, but I'll just set up 10 rooms, and whoever would like to stay can join.
Great. Thank you all. Take care.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. See you soon.